Hello, my name is Roman. I'm here in Lviv, Ukraine with my great friend, Curt Doolittle, and we're going to talk about propertarianism. So I recently saw you post something on Facebook that kind of turned my anarcho-capitalist world upside down. It was a short saying: so long as the market demands a state, the market will provide a state. What are you doing, and why are you doing it?
That's great. You know, I actually can't remember if I wrote that or someone else did, and in response to what I'd said. I think it was actually one of my readers translated what I had been saying into short form. But I've been saying that you know, it's one thing to go out and try to convince people that they don't want a state. It's another to look at what are the reasons that people demand a state. Now, in libertarianism, they're always casting this idea that the state is the mighty oppressor who's come down to seek rents against you, and to some degree, once you get a state, of course they do. But you know, we forget that, especially in the West, the aristocracy built cities and markets. They paid for them. They defended them. They made them safe. They made trading markets, and so they're just like shopping malls. So shopping mall owners do those
states are just like shopping malls.
Well, I mean, the city states were originally like shopping malls, and the owners treated them like shopping malls, and that was that they worked to defend them and they worked to build them, and so they treated them like owners. Now,
but would you agree with that initial libertarian assessment that you quoted, that the state is this giant oppressive beast? It seems to me like instead of criticizing states outright the way most libertarians do, you're just criticizing their size and the extent of their monopoly. Is that a fair summary?
No, I think I agree with human scale, right? I agree with what I'm disagreeing with libertarians on is the real topic you want to get at here, I think, is that libertarians believe that if I can just make everyone have my values,
yes,
right, then there won't be any demand for the state.
Yes.
But this denies the fact. This is a denial of human nature that you know, the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century that scientists are trying very hard to correct back to its prior perception. And that is that there's a demand for a state for a reason. Now, if you live in, let's say, a low trust polity, a Levantine culture, which is very tribal, and there's lots of people around you, right? And every one of those groups is familially or tribally trying to compete in its own interests or for its own interests. You have a low trust polity generally, and that's because you're treating out-group members that aren't in your polity, very differently
from those who are
those who are in your group. If you're an island people, like the entire Anglosphere is, right, then you go to the opposite of the spectrum. Is well, there's nobody to compete with. As a matter of fact, everybody in England's not in the northern European area, the whole Protestantism. Nobody's very distant relative of anybody else. And so they have a very high trust society. In their world, they extended trust in-family trust to everybody, to the point where they have an absolute nuclear family. In other words, a husband and a wife live together in a house, and they're trying to get rid of the kids out of the house, right? And so they can have an empty nest. Yes. Well, the absolute nuclear family works because what we did in history is you took your kids, when they got old enough, they went and were a servant for some other family. Right? Yeah. And so you basically were this enormous extended family. It was very homogenous. And so you treated in-group members, you know, there were no out-group members. As a matter of fact, I think in early German, there's actually there's no actually term for foreigner.
Really?
You know, it's just brothers or men.
Wow.
You know? So there's this thing of we've extended family trust. Now the church calls it Christian love because they want to own it, but it's really just Indo-European, circumpolar Indo-European behavior, which is that we live in a really harsh place. We all sort of depend on each other. We're all closely related, and people turn out to be really valuable.
Yeah, this is one of your ideas, which I think I've pretty fully absorbed, where Northern and Western Europe is the only place where all of society became your extended family.
Yes,
and it's evident even when you go from Northern Western Europe to Southern Eastern Europe, where there's sort of a dual loyalty, one to your family and the other one to the state.
Yeah, and well, I mean, there's one to
or
your
to
family.
To society.
There's one to your family, one to society, and
Yeah.
the state's your enemy.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Whereas in Northern European, you elected your kings, you had the common law, your nobility was there, and you don't really have this peasant class type of thing, and especially in England. I would argue that England never had a real peasant class by comparison. So you get a high trust society in the North, which you extend out-group trust to all members. So the reason you asked your question is, what's different between the statement you're making and the one that libertarians make? Well,
yes.
Libertarians are making a Levantine argument.
I was about to ask that.
Right? They're making a Levantine argument or a cosmopolitan argument, which is that we want to preserve in-group trust. Right, we want to somehow get it to everybody, right? But we don't have any mechanism for doing that except belief, selling you.
Oh, interesting.
Right, and so the Northern European model, especially the Anglo model, is to use the common law instead, and it's just to require you to tell the truth.
Common law requires you to tell the truth.
Well, I mean, the common law is the institution of the institution that we use to train people, right, by dispute resolution.
Okay.
And so you instead of having a set of, well, let me see if I can. I'm going to give you, the problem is for the audience, they're going to listen to this and they're going to well, I'm getting lost here, right?
All right. And let's try to make sure that doesn't happen.
So let's just take it back to family structures to start with, and let's just. I started out with the Levantine model or the cosmopolitan model, or I always think of it as the ghetto, right? We talk about the ghetto because that's a Levantine group with in-group morality and out-group morality, very different things. It's actually codified in Jewish law as in-group morality versus out-group morality, and the out-group is cast as devils or evil people. And so you have a Levantine morality code, which is definitely binary, right? But they're the only low trust polity we have living next to us. If we lived in the Middle East, of course, you'd have every other tribe
That's
around.
The standard, very
it's the
tribal.
Standard, very tribal thing.
I certainly felt that in Iraq. It was all about the tribes.
It's all about the tribes. So you have in-group, and this is just reproductive strategy, right? So if this is your reproductive strategy.
You support your kin.
You support your kin. Well, I mean, in Northern Europe, we're all kin, so we kind of teach this we kind of interpret this metaphysically as the natural way of man.
Yes.
But it's actually incredibly unnatural. We're the only people who ever did it.
Yes.
Right? And we do it partly because we're on the edge of civilization. We're at the very edge of the Bronze Age when it kicks off, right? We have...
and maybe a lot of the culture came from England, who were island people.
Well, I think the verbalism of the Enlightenment, in other words, the arguments of the Enlightenment certainly start as a propagation of science out, scientific thinking, Aristotelian thinking, out into the rest of the world. But if you look at what we call the Hanjal line, which is where the church succeeded in suppressing inbreeding. In other words,
the Hanjal line is an area that divides northwestern Europe from the rest of the world, and there was really different patterns of how many children people had. On the inside of the Hanjal line, meaning northwest, fewer children and richer people. On the other side, more children, poorer people. Is that generally
close, except for the church banned out inbreeding.
Banned inbreeding. They banned marriage out to your sixth cousin or something
6, 8,
like that.
And I've seen arguments to say it's out to 10 or 12, but I mean, the safe matter is 6 to 8 generations. Whereas in Middle Eastern, some of these groups are almost entirely father's brother's daughter. That you're marrying your first cousin almost relationship, and this makes sense because it keeps property in the family.
And the effect of this is the outbreeding inside the Hanjal line was that all of society became your family.
You develop what we call Christian love, but it really is just universalism. You treat everybody as if you extend the natural trust of your family member to everybody. In fact, you do what the French absolutely think is horrible of the Germans and the English, is that you try to kick your kids out of the house and make them self-responsible children. You're trying to get them out there because you don't want these freeloaders on your
The French don't like that?
Well, they always say that we treat, the Germans treat, or Americans in particular, treat our children children horribly.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And of course, here in Ukraine, they have a more traditional family. You keep your family together. But one of the reasons England could develop the Industrial Revolution is because nuclear families are portable. They're movable. Whereas an extended family isn't. You can't move a whole extended family to capital very easily. And so, whereas you could if you have a heavy capital industry somewhere in Northern Europe, you can move your families to your capital. Yeah. You have migratory labor. As a matter of fact, this is what economists actually frustrate the daylights out of me. They're trying to figure out how we can have this homogeneous multicultural society while they're basically trying to get us even break the family apart now to be more economically efficient by making us incredibly mobile labor, which just destroys family and destroys the family structure even farther because there's a limit to to what you do. I mean, Manuel Todd's argument is that nuclear families, or absolute nuclear families, are very fragile social systems because they depend on this perpetuation of high trust for everyone. But it's a very fragile system. If you start breaking the family apart, which we've done in America now, you end up with what's happened to Black America, which is since 1930 we've destroyed that
single parenthood
into single parenthood.
Walter Williams said that modern America has had a worse effect on the black family than even slavery.
It did. Yeah. I mean, it had a worse effect on it, and it's really obvious, right? You got 70% single marriage and single mothers, and you look at the criminal statistics. I mean, all the bad stuff happens from single parenthood. I mean, if I can't, I'm not going to go pull up statistics for it. But I mean, it's largely a single parent effect.
All right, so we returned to the discussion of family to clarify something, and we were talking about libertarianism and what libertarians are not quite getting right. Should we return to that now?
Yeah, let's go back to it because one of the innovations I tried to bring into the thought of liberty, which is, I desire liberty just like the libertarians do. I just desire that liberty in the form I believe it can be scientifically or rationally achieved. And the difference is to focus on the issue of trust. They focus on the property, but on property itself, and they limit it to private property. So I'm going to talk about trust because trust is what determines if you can have a polity that respects private property. So if you want a state... Trust,
not property.
Well, I mean, you got to have property, but you got to have trust to have property. Yep. So the point I'm going to try to get to here is maybe if this is one of those things where I'm like, should I start this all over again and come up from this direction? Is that the reason there's a demand for the state is because people lie, cheat, and steal.
Yes.
Right? They murder, lie, cheat, and steal. And so how do you convert a polity that's enormous, right? I mean, how do you make a polity out of all these families and tribes?
I think if I could interject, I think a lot of libertarians would be satisfied to add to that. There's a demand for the state because people lie, cheat, and steal, and then they do all those bad things through the state.
Well, they do. And so what we do, and this is my argument, is when we create a state, we exchange high local transaction costs, my inability to trust you, right?
Yes.
We exchange that for high indirect costs. In other words...
Wow, that's a really good statement. We should make sure it's...
Well, I mean, I write about it. I mean, it's just, if you're trying to make this big a change in how people think, some of these things get lost.
Without a state, there's really high transaction costs because there might not be an authority to punish the liars, cheaters, and
you
stealers.
you can't, right? You
yeah,
just can't get away.
You don't have the power to do it.
Because you remember, lying, we think lying and cheating is like a minority thing, right? But if you go to a low trust polity, if you go to China,
Heck, Ukraine in the 90s.
Oh yeah, Ukraine in the 90s.
It's getting better now.
Especially since nationalism has given the people a desire to trust each other.
Yes.
So what I try to talk about is it's all well and good, but you need the transaction costs of a low trust society are economically debilitating. And the reason the Northern Europeans are wealthier is because they have a high trust society. So basically, you are almost sure that any action you take is not going to result in lying, cheating, or stealing. As a matter of fact, the courts are going to emphasize not property rights, right? Mm-hmm. in the intersubjectively ascertainable
Courts
sense.
will not emphasize property rights.
Well, no, I say libertarianism says that morality is determined by intersubjectively verifiable transfer of property. In other words, physical things.
Yes.
But But that's great. But it's all well and good. But that just prohibits violence. It doesn't prohibit lying and cheating and stealing by indirection.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
fraud is kind of a footnote on the libertarian gospel. Yeah.
Right.
It's all about non-aggression. Yeah.
And so it's all about non-aggression, but this is, again, Levantine. It's extremely primitive, low-trust societies. It's not enough. So what you find in high-trust societies, they take all forms of stealing off. They take property stealing, right? They take unethical theft, right? Theft by unethics, which is fraud, misrepresentation, asymmetry, taking advantage of every single thing you can do. They get rid of immorality, which is free riding, privatizing the commons, whatever it is. They having children out of wedlock and forcing other people to take care of your children. So in high trust societies, they prohibit not only their concept of property rights is all property that the people have made. So
including like the behaviors.
The common,
yes.
I call it the normative commons.
Normative commons as property.
Right, and so the normative commons is treated as property, and I'll tell you why, because you paid for it. You paid for it every time I don't steal your phone or somebody doesn't pick something up.
Opportunity cost.
The opportunity cost is there. So what we do is we create this high trust society, and we say, as a matter of fact, the only thing you can do, the only thing that's permissible in our society is to participate in the market, the voluntary market for productivity.
Right.
And everything else, every other kind of parasitism, whether it's criminal parasitism, ethical parasitism, or moral parasitism, right? Whatever on that spectrum is prohibited.
Yes.
And this is what makes a high trust polity with low transaction costs. And in this polity, when the common law addresses, in other words, when organic polycentric law that evolves naturally without interference from the state, in organic polycentric law that evolves naturally in the absence of the state, that adheres to this prohibition on involuntary transfers, or as Jan Lester calls it, imposed costs. If that's all prohibited, and you can resolve it in the court, in common law, if you can go and say he acted immorally just because you're a citizen, no other reason, not you weren't harmed or anything else, you can go stop that immoral action in court and have him corrected for it, which is what we did.
Punish the free riders.
We punish the free riders. Yep. The only choice people have is to participate productively in society.
Yes, yes.
And so that's what creates the high trust polity. Now what happens, though, is that you first get a state. Right? That's a natural evolution, is to concentrate might in some sort of polity that can suppress free riding often enough to drive people into the market.
Yes.
But once you
great.
get there, now you've created a different problem. You've eliminated the local transaction costs, but now you've created parasites in the bureaucracy.
Yes.
Right? So the problem is, how do you get rid of parasites in the bureaucracy? Right? Is that you eliminate the monopoly. You do the same thing. You
open everything up to the market.
You open up to the market.
Yep.
And so you drive services. You drive the competition for services into public services.
Medicine, education, transportation.
Just drive it in.
Justice, security.
And you disallow free riding.
The more I started to absorb these ideas from you, the more it seemed like going from the property angle that libertarians approach it from, and the non-aggression principle, it's a binary. It's like yes or no, right and wrong. Whereas the more you focus on trust, the more it's a gradient.
It is a gradient. I usually draw it as one. Yeah,
a sort of gradient of violations of property, or a gradient of immorality, you can call it.
I do it by distance from you. So I start out with, if I murder you, that's pretty direct, right? And that's physical. If I hurt you, that's pretty direct. If I take your property, it's still sort of direct. If I start fraud on you, that's interpersonal still. It's a little less direct. If I commit indirect fraud, which is
fraud by omission.
Fraud by omission, right? And so if I create all these things, they get farther and farther away from you, and to the point where you're committing immoral actions, right? Which is I'm harming the commons by privatizing some little bit of it. I'm lying, cheating, stealing, whatever, or doing something immoral, even using bad manners, right? If I'm doing that, I'm actually stealing from the commons. Right? I mean, and so I'm harming you because you've sacrificed all these payments. Like you've foregone all these opportunities for no benefit.
I've been a good citizen.
You've been a good
honest person.
You paid for it. You paid for that commons. Right? Everybody has paid for it, and that person's stealing.
For it with opportunity costs.
Yes.
Right.
And so you pay for your property. You pay for everything with opportunity costs, but you pay for your norms in particular with it. You pay exclusively Your commons, some of your physical commons, you may pay through fees or donations or taxes or whatever. I don't like to use taxes, but the fees are taxes. You've paid for those physical commons, but you've also paid for your normative commons, the normative commons that produce the high trust society that reduce transaction costs so that the cost of goods and services continually decreases.
We're closing in on 20 minutes. I think we got a good idea of what you're doing. Maybe we should wrap up by a short statement of why you're doing it.
Well, I get started. Of course, I didn't plan any of this, right? I mean, this is just where logic takes you. I started out originally because I was frustrated with conservatives' inability to speak in rational language, because conservative language is allegorical. It's moral. It's very ancient. The conservative value system goes back thousands of years. It's Indo-European at its core. Heroism, right? Individualism, property, truth. These things go back thousands of years, although that I would say that most of it probably did mature in the early and Middle Ages. The conservatives have all this allegorical, historical, and
they're allegorically right, but they can't portray it rationally.
They can't portray it in rational terms. So
I remember you once posted that you have a great debt to Hans Hermann Hoppe because he taught you to speak about morality in economic terms.
Yeah, I'm sort of on the outs with Hans right now, but the fact is that while if I disagree with his German and continental use of what I consider very silly philosophy as justification, compared to his genius at applying the economic way of thinking to morality.
Okay.
And the problem I come up is he's
maybe we should save this for the next one.
Okay.
It's a really deep topic.
It's a really deep topic. But it's really fun.
Okay.
Well, we got a little slow started there, so I apologize to the audience in advance for the meandering way through. But I think we did get to the point where I'm trying to address trust is the fundamental problem of social organization.
And you're doing it because?
I'm doing it because I was really frustrated
with conservatives.
Right, and we have been at, one of the other talks we'll give is the systemic attack since the late 1800s on Western society and how it's been done from every possible angle, and what they're attacking is truth and trust.
I can't wait.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks.